Support for the Q&A with A.P.C. is provided by the Massa Corporation. For 55 years, the Massa Corporation has provided companies with a complete line of printing solutions, from custom labels to contract packaging services, as well as packaging equipment and supplies. Proudly serving Virginia and its neighbors since 1961. Online at massacorp.com. This is Andrew Paul Cronin, and you're listening to the Q&A with A.P.C., the show that features conversations with artists, cultural figures, policymakers, performers, and other innovators living in Virginia. Episode 29, Andy Harris. My guest, Andy Harris, is an art education teacher and visual artist working primarily in mixed media collage. His work has been shown at the Virginia Museum of Contemporary Art and has been featured in the HBO show High Maintenance. He is currently finishing a 12-month residency as a member of the Glass Wheel Studios Incubator Program. His work is created using hand-painted papers, which he cuts and layers to form images such as houses, boats, landscapes, weapons, tools, and food. For the last 8 months, he has collected and uncovered little-known stories from Norfolk, Virginia, about Marilyn Monroe, Michael Jackson, Harry Houdini, Elvis Presley, secret tunnels, dead bodies, missing limbs, and more. His show, Neighborhood Watch, opens September 22nd at the Off-Site Gallery located in the World Trade Center building in downtown Norfolk and runs until November 9th. For more information about Andy Harris and his art, visit aharrisart.com. Andy Harris, thanks so much for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me.
Andy, do you remember the first image or painting or movie that stuck with you growing up?
Man, well, I used to draw dinosaurs all the time. Like probably every single, there's nothing unique about that. I think a lot of kids do that, but I mean, that was like what I was fixated on. I would get Mad magazines and try to draw any of the cartoons that I was pulling out of those magazines. Movies. A lot of movies that I should not have been watching when I was that age.
How did that happen? Was that like on TV kind of thing, or the rental?
Yeah, it was on TV.
Yeah.
And parents would go to sleep. I'd sneak down and watch TV and just no censorship.
Right.
And so, Revenge of the Nerds, National Lampoon's Vacation, like movies a 6-year-old, 7-year-old shouldn't be watching.
Right.
But man, I remember sitting there watching them and just loving it.
And feeling like you got the humor.
No, that's the thing too. Even as I got older, the movies that I liked as a kid, like Wayne's World, when that came out, I loved it. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't until 10 years later when I was like rewatching, I was like, dude, I didn't get half of those jokes. Yeah. Those were way above my head.
Right. Do you remember the first movie you saw in the theater?
Yeah, I do. The first movie I remember being in a theater was Back to the Future, and I fell asleep right after Marty McFly hits the guitar and it blasts him back. So at the very beginning, I fell asleep right after. But the movie that really stuck with me, and this is so funny. So my dad's mom took me and my sister to the movie theater to see Raising Arizona, and I was young. I mean, I was 5 or 6, but that motorcycle, dude,
right? It
just stuck with me.
Right.
And what else stuck with me is sitting in line to get our tickets was a movie poster for The Gate. Have you ever seen The Gate? Mm-mm. Oh, The Gate is where this kid plays like a satanic record, and a hole that leads to hell,
like a portal
comes in his backyard, and all these little demon guys come out, and he has to figure out how to close the portal.
Andy, what was school like for you in terms of grades?
Oh, man, I was an average student. I was just not that good at school. I was good at drawing, And I think when I got to like, junior year and senior year in high school, I was like, okay, this is what I'm going to do, because this is the only thing that is really stirring up a passion inside of me. Art, yeah, the art class. So, my senior year, I think I had 3 art classes, maybe even a study hall in there. I mean, it was, and what's crazy, man, is when I got to college, a switch flipped. I was making A's. I had great grades, and because I was doing something I was really passionate about.
Did you go to public school?
Yep, Cox High School.
Who did you hang out with in school? Like, who was your crew?
Musicians. Yeah, so I mean, I started playing drums when I was 14. So pretty much my house was the practice space after school. I don't know how my mom put up with that, but every day after school, I was in a couple different bands, and so I hung out with mostly musicians. A couple of kids who weren't musicians, but we shared punk music as an interest, and a couple of guys I'm still friends with today.
One of the things that you did in terms of your art when you were a kid was you made kung fu movies with your parents' VHS camera.
Oh, yeah.
Do you remember any of the titles or plots from those?
Oh, yeah. I mean, the plots were just a ripoff of Snake and Crane Arts of Shaolin, Jackie Chan, any Bruce Lee movie. Bruce Lee was my gateway film to martial arts. When I saw him in, Chinese Connection, Fist of Fury, him flexing and him just his physique. Yeah. I was like, that is so cool. And so the movies, back to the movies, it was all about special effects. Story, plot line, it doesn't matter. I want to do special effects. One of the coolest special effects in the movies we made is I got a white T-shirt, cut it up the sides, duct taped it back on the inside, and I had my friend grab my shirt and just rip it off, and it came off like way too quick.
Yeah.
So that you see this like 14-year-old boy like underneath who was angry now.
Yeah.
Oh man, it's funny you say that because I just pulled a bag of VHS tapes out of a storage unit like 2 or 3 weeks ago.
Yeah.
And they're in there, buddy.
You graduated high school in 1998. What was your life plan after high school?
Man, life plan after high school, man, I couldn't think of what was coming tomorrow. I couldn't think 20 minutes ahead of me. So it was just to do the best I could that day and try to get through college.
Did you go straight to college after high school?
Yep.
Yeah.
And that was, my sister and my mom really helping me fill out all the paperwork and push me through. I'm so glad they did, because left to my own willpower, it probably wouldn't have happened.
You went to college at Virginia Commonwealth University, or VCU as it's called, and you got a degree in communications arts. Mm-hmm. What's that mean?
Well, I think my diploma also says fine arts. It's really what I went for was I was in the track that was either graphic design, video, or illustration. So I had to take all of those classes, but I was really focused on the video, and I went to VCU right at the turn of the digital revolution. So my first year, we were actually using VHS tapes, having to go through and black them out, analog, right? So the next semester we switched to Max and we're doing digital. So I was right there to see that change. That's cool, but what's not cool is I spent a whole semester learning how to edit on VHS tapes, which is useless.
Yeah.
And they were wording it like, oh, you're still learning some of the foundations of editing. No. It was what took me 3 hours to do now took me 5 minutes.
Uh-huh.
So I chose the video track, but what I did is I kind of specialized it, right? So I filled my electives up with sculpture classes over in the Fine Arts building. And so what I would do is I would coordinate with teachers and make projects that kind of expanded in both classes, and I did a lot of stop motion animation. Some digital animation back then, still using After Effects. It was like still kind of rickety and took a long time to render and all this stuff, and we had like 1 gig storage drives,
right,
the orb drives. But stop motion animation, man, that's what I wanted to do.
And you made, as you mentioned, a few animated movies in college. Like, what do you remember about those films? Kind of like going back to the kung fu movies, like in terms of like theme or plot.
Well, it was cool because, okay, so I'm still making the kung fu movies when conceptually it's the same thing. I have the camera. I know what shots I want. It's the same thing. I'm just up in my game now. I'm creating, since I can't, I don't have money for a budget, so I can't get a studio and make a set. I'm making these miniature sets. I'm creating these small worlds. I'm learning about lighting these worlds and how they can change the mood, how they can add emphasis on certain characters. And then my storytelling was just like bare bones. Shaolin Mantis Kung Fu. It's about a boy who goes into town and gets beat up by the town bully, then runs off into the woods crying, sees a little mantis fighting another mantis in the woods and sits there and studies them, goes back to the town and uses his mantis style to defeat the bully. I mean, that's about as intelligent as the storylines got, but I wasn't worried about that. I wanted to make something fun. It was really cool seeing that byproduct.
When you say stop motion animation, is that claymation? Was it clay? What was?
Yeah, so I would make these armatures. Now you can buy these like metal armatures with like joints, and they look like they're made of like titanium or something like that. But at the time, I was using balsa wood wire and making these skeletons, and then just covering them, making costumes for them to cover up everything underneath. Clay heads so I could change the facial expressions. Mm-hmm. But I also spent a lot of time at Kinko's cutting paper out, making tons of copies. Back then, I mean, if you were in a band or you were an artist, you lived at Kinko's making stuff using the printers. And so I did a lot of 2D animations too.
While you were in college, you were one of the original or founding members of the band Municipal Waste. And Municipal Waste plays a genre of music called crossover thrash, which is a fusion between heavy metal and punk rock. You played bass in the band. From 2001 to 2004, you were in the band and you toured across the United States and Mexico. What do you remember about those tours?
Oh, we also toured, right after we released Waste 'Em All, we toured Europe for 6 weeks. Man, that was it was an awesome experience, and in part of that wasn't we were playing music, but really to me the music was secondary. I loved the dudes in the band. Like, we were just all great friends, and we all had a very similar sense of humor. So it was just nonstop jokes the whole time, finding fun in everything. So those tours were really cool, man. And it's weird. I'll be somewhere today and bump into somebody that I met in San Francisco, and be like, "Whoa, dude, how you doing? It's been 16 years."
Did you have a tour manager, or did you guys do it all sort of between you?
Tony Foresta, a singer for Waste, he was at the time pretty much the manager. He was on it. He was booking shows. That was like, he was very driven and really good at it.
How did you get from one venue to the next?
The bandana. We had our van, and we had all the gear underneath the back seat or in the back. And we toured all over with that thing. And then when we went to Europe, it's set up a little differently. I'm sure now, they're on a higher level. But for like a DIY band like we were at the time, we flew in, went to our first gig space where they were, and you sleep where the gigs are at a lot of times when we were in Europe. And they had a van ready for us. They had most of almost all the gear. We had our guitars and stuff, and I think the drummer had like his cymbals, maybe his snare. They have everything set up. They have a driver that can navigate us through.
Why did you leave the band?
I mean, that's, people always ask me that, and they're like, "Man, don't you regret it?" It's like, dude, I love playing music, but I think I love playing music in a different way than musicians, like professional musicians.
And I don't know if this happened during college or after college. You hung commercial wallpaper for a while. What did you take away from that experience?
Just making money. When I moved back to Virginia Beach, I left Municipal Waste, moved back to Virginia Beach. Right out of the gate, I got a job painting a Holiday Inn over on Greenbrier. Painting, they had these wooden columns surrounding this bar, and they needed it faux finished to make it look like wood. They wanted it was poplar green wood. They wanted a maple. So I got paid like, I forget, it was like $1,000 or $2,000. It was something crazy. I'd never seen a check that big before.
Right.
So I painted these things, and I was like, whoa, I could like do this. And the guy who gave me the work was like, he was like, "Hey, you want to hang wallpaper? I'll give you some hours." And so I just kind of, just to kind of keep bringing in money and keep working, I started working with the guy, and he's a really good friend of mine, and he taught me a lot about it. And man, it was so hard. I mean, you hear people talking about doing wallpaper in their house. I mean, it is really tough.
What's hard about it?
It doesn't do what you want it to do. If you're hanging actual paper, like paper as opposed to like vinyl wallpaper they use in hotels, I mean, you got one shot. And typically that stuff's really expensive. So if you mess it up, you're buying a roll of it and it's really expensive. So you're matching patterns, you're making sure things are level. Not only that, you're wetting the paper, you're putting it on the wall, and you can only touch it but so much because your smoother in the paddle will start to rip it. It'll start to buckle it. I mean, there's all sorts of stuff that can go wrong.
Did you find in that job that you were able to exercise some artistic muscle?
That is awesome. Okay, so I'm glad you asked that because I got in trouble on job sites so much for doing drywall graffiti. So I remember coming to work one time and the guy was like, man, the GM's looking for you. I was like, why? He's like, someone told him that you drew that picture of him on the 15th floor or whatever. I would just draw all, because these walls were getting covered up anyway.
Right.
So I would draw all over them. So yeah, the foreman was like a really specific looking dude, glasses, mustache, hard hat. So I drew a huge picture of his face on the wall, and he probably had a word bubble that was like, "Oh, get back to work," or wear your hard hat or something like that. And he was looking for me, man. But I would get really creative with before, like if we were doing a hotel, you would strip all the wallpaper, prime the walls, put the new wallpaper up. So I was like cutting these pictures out of the wallpaper and peeling parts off. It's kind of like my steak work. You know how it has that flopping motion?
Yeah.
I would have these just weird pictures flopping off the walls in every room.
Did it get you more comfortable also working with like a large piece of, like a large surface in terms, because many of your art pieces are on a very large canvas?
No, I don't think so. But what it did get me used to was I can mud walls now. I can paint, I can mask. I can do a lot of the nuts and bolts of art making from my experience doing that, like construction, that wallpaper work. It's so crazy how much of that stuff, and at the time I hated it. I mean, I would be at work and I'd be like, oh my gosh, it was such hard work and it's sweaty, and you're around people that don't want to be there, that have really negative attitudes. So there's a lot about it that I didn't like, but what I didn't know was how much I was actually taken away from it.
For the last 8 years, you've been a middle and high school art teacher. How did you decide to become a teacher?
One night, I think I was hanging wallpaper, doing the construction type thing. We had piecework, right? So we would work really hard for 6 weeks, 8 weeks. Then we'd go a month without working. We'd go out of town sometimes too. But there was like a stretch of a month where we weren't working, so I was running out of money. And I think I had not paid my roommate the rent, and I had gone to New York City, just riding along with my band at the time. I get back, and he was like, dude, you need to pay your rent. And I was, confiding in him, but, he's like, you need to go get another job. And I'm like, but I want to do art. And he just broke me off, and he was like, you need to find someone who's going to pay you to do that. And in the meantime, you need to go get another job so you can pay me my rent. And it was like a light bulb moment, man. It was like, I was so angry at him for calling me out. I was ashamed that I was, 27, 28, 29 years old. And, I was having trouble paying my rent. It was tough, man. And, it took a while after that, but I think that was like the kind of seed that was planted. It was like, you do need to find something. What's it going to be? How are you going to do it? And so I had a good friend, Adam Roth Printing and Design. He's a first colonial teacher, but he does screen printing, photography, video. He does a ton of stuff. And I remember seeing him. He was able to afford a lifestyle that let him go surfing during the summertime, that go to the gym all the time. I'd see him at the gym all the time. Screen print shirts, like do this cool stuff. And he was able to take that into his work and go to work and do those things. So I was like, man, that's what I want to do. I want to teach. So I'm the type of guy that if I have something that I'm going to set out to do, I try to talk to every single person that I know that does something similar to that to get little bits of information from all of them, and they always lead me to where I need to be going.
What did you think teaching was going to be like before you became a teacher, and what has it really been like?
I thought it was going to be peaches and cream. I'm an art teacher. Kids.
Wait, what does that mean? What does that mean?
I thought I was going to go walk into work whistling every day, and for a lot of days I am, And when I got there, I had to get used to the fact that I've spent all this time creating the coolest lesson plan, that we're going to do the coolest project, and there's still going to be a kid or two in there that's going to be looking at the ceiling and going, oh, this is so boring.
Yeah.
And so I couldn't, you can't expect, you don't expect stuff like that.
You're not going to get everybody all the
No,
time.
you're not. But what I've learned is now I'm getting veteran status, dude. This is like
Sure.
my 8th year teaching.
Yeah.
Like those are the kids that now when I'm building those lesson plans, I have them in mind. And I'm like, okay, I've got this, this, and this that I'm going to throw their way when they say that.
Yeah.
And let's see if they can take that challenge. So in a way, man, it's really turned into this cool thing where, yeah, I'm doing my art outside of school, but my teaching is my art too, because I'm constantly like challenged to like try new materials, to communicate how I want them to make art in all of these different ways.
Has teaching art inadvertently taught you about art?
Oh man, absolutely. Well, okay, so let's take ceramics, for example. If you look through my Instagram, you'll see that around the holidays, I'm selling coffee mugs and plates and bowls and all that. Well, the school I was at had one pottery wheel and like this like rickety kiln. We got some grant money, so I bought a couple more pottery wheels, bought a brand new kiln, computerized now. That's how they all are now. Rolling rack, tools, all this stuff. And I got it all, I put in the purchase order and we got it all.
Yeah.
It comes to school, I help build it, so I see all this stuff. I'm like, okay, I don't know how to throw anything. I don't know how to use this kiln. I don't know anything about pottery. So I took a local class on ceramic making, and I went in there and picked that dude's brain. I mean, I was there to learn how to do it. And so he taught me how to throw on the pottery wheel. He taught me all the basic mistakes. Like I came in there one day with my own clay and it was like this like weird green color. And he's like, what the hell's that? We'll get that out of here. And I didn't know that if I were to put that clay in the kiln with some other temperature fire clay, it would melt and ruin the furniture inside. Potentially could ruin the kiln.
Right.
So he taught me all of those mistakes that I was going to go make on my own,
right?
With my own consequences,
right? In school with the kids,
exactly,
right?
Yeah. So he taught me all that stuff, and man, it's that repeating thing. I found someone who's doing it. I picked their brain. I got his phone number. He was a principal at a school. I called him all the time, and he was always willing to help me out and tell me what to do. And I still have a lot to learn. Like I want to make teapots. I want to do large vessels. But I know enough that I could show a kid how to build a really solid foundation in ceramics.
Describe the feeling you have when you're sitting at a pottery wheel with your hands shaping clay. And I've never done that. And I guess my question is more, do you know what you want to make, or does it end up shaping itself in a way?
When I force what I want in any of my art stuff, it never turns out as good as the piece where I just sit down and start making and start gluing or start forming and start building. Those pieces always give me the feeling of stepping back, taking a look at it and be like, yes, that's what I like. That's what I wanted to make. Perfect. So a lot of times, like, okay, so around the holidays when I'm making coffee mugs, right? I'll know I'm going to sit down and make a coffee mug. Mm-hmm. I'll make a way cooler one if I just sit down and start throwing it and mess up, maybe throw another ball of clay on and keep going.
Yeah.
But if I set out to focus to make a 4-inch tall, 4-inch diameter opening, the handle is going to be attached here. I'm going to lose 1 out of every 5 because I'm going to mess it up because I'm forcing something on there.
You once said in an interview that whether I am doodling in my sketchbook, throwing coffee mugs on a pottery wheel, screen printing T-shirts, or destroying magazines with scissors, I'm constantly working on something. I like to work. What do you attribute that to?
Man, I think it's kind of like we were talking earlier about being in school, right? I mean, I wasn't ever really that great at math or science and really bad at foreign language. But with art, I've always made stuff that I've kind of surprised myself with. Making stuff is what stirs up the passion within me. So I think some people get that drive from selling insurance. Some people get the drive from building houses. My drive comes when I'm making stuff. I feel that where the hair stands up on your arms, like talking about it. Making art, talking about art, making things, that makes the hair on my arms stand up. That's what drives me.
Do most people like to work?
It depends. I mean, I don't know. I mean, what do you think? What do you do?
Well, I do this and I teach. So I asked because when I read that quote from you, I saw myself in that quote because I like to work. My wife would say, and I would agree with her, I have a hard time relaxing.
I think, I started teaching 7, 8 years ago.
Yeah.
I can't remember the last time I really dreaded going to work.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's all about what you do,
What you
man.
do.
I mean, it goes back to that conversation I was telling you, right? You got to find someone who's going to pay you to do what you want to do. Since I've put that into motion, I love going to work, man, because I'm making work fit what I want to do. I enjoy coming up with a good idea on how to make a sculpture and then presenting it to people and watching people bring something to this earth, just from the challenge that I've given them.
Mm-hmm.
So I like going to work.
What was the first thing you created that you felt broke through and grabbed someone's attention?
Off the top of my head, when Tyler Thomas, the Richmond artist, and I did this prison weapons series, and we called it Mother Scratcher. It was kind of a little play on, little nod to Raising Arizona. When I started making those pieces, people would look at them and I would get a cool reaction from people. People connected with them. And so I think those tools and weapons that I started making really started generating an energy in my work.
In your 2016 show, Mother Scratcher, you and Tyler Thomas that you just mentioned created pieces that were based on as many as 200 prison weapons that were collected from prison officials dating as far back as the 1960s. A lot of those prints are available on your website, andyharrisart.com, if people wanted to see them. What specifically drew you into making those series? Can you talk about sort of what the grab was?
At the time, I was into knives. I had 2 or 3. I didn't have very many, but I was just really admiring the wood grain, the blade. So I started making little art pieces. Meanwhile, I saw Tyler Thomas on his Instagram feed. He was doing these pen and ink drawings of these weapons. And so I called him, reached out to him. I was like, "Hey, let's do a weapons show." And he's like, "Yeah, let's do it." And we got to talking, and we were like, what if we made kid weapons, like all the little weapons you make as a kid, tying sticks together with fishing line, a stick with a string, and then a rock tied to it. So I was like, okay, this is cool. Let's start going with that. And then one of us suggested, what about prison weapons? And I did like the kid weapon idea, but I felt like the prison weapon idea could lead us down a path that would be richer, would be heavier, more there. And so what happened was we just started talking about it more and more and developing all these ideas. And then it was like, well, why don't we not just make what we think prison weapons look like? Why don't we start talking to people that have gone to prison? So what I started to do was find people who had either gone to prison or worked in prison as guards, and just through word of mouth, he's like, "Oh yeah, you need to talk to so and so. He worked in Maryland, man." And people let me sit down at Starbucks with them and record our conversations, and I got the craziest stories about prison. So what we did was, a lot of the pieces were from that collection we saw. A friend of ours works at the Virginia Historical Society up in Richmond, and she had boxes of prison weapons. She's like, we don't know what to do with them. We're like, they're artifacts, but no one knows what to do with them. So they let us come in, spread them out, photograph them all, and I've been dying to use them for an exhibit. I just can't find anyone in a gallery who will accept it as art to let me display them. So I don't know what I have that kind of on the back burner, all these weapons, because when you see them, they're just so powerful, dude.
Can you describe some of the weapons that are in that show? Were in that show?
Yeah. One guy told me it was back in the 70s. He was a drugstore cowboy. He would break in through the roof of pharmacies, and he would steal drugs and cigarettes, pharmaceuticals and cigarettes. And according to him, he was really good at it, but not the best, because he ends up getting caught. And I mean, I could tell you the story about him getting caught too. I mean, it's just, you find these stories and they just keep going. They're like roots or like riverways. They just keep going and keep going. So it was his first time going to prison. He had grown up on a farm, and he was like, I've never seen a black person before. He was like, prison was my introduction to other races. He says when you got to the prison, you were called a fish. and if you were new and you were wearing white, and everyone knew you were new, everyone knew you were fish because you're standing there in white. And when they walk you in the prison, they walk you right in front of the electric chair. So you have to look at the electric chair before going in. And he said one day these two guys were fighting, and the dude pulled a hair pick out of his hair and had sharpened the inside of one of the spikes on his hair pick, and had put it in the guy's mouth and just cut up his cheek so you could see all his teeth. And so that freaked me out hearing that. But at the same time, as an artist, as kind of like a journalist, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, the imagery starts popping off in my head. So I'm like, okay, hold on to this. So I started making these hair picks called Deadly Hair Picks. So that's kind of the story behind one of them. Other stories too, I mean, I have a ton of them. But what I would do is I would take a little bit from here and a little bit from there and a little bit from there, and I would make one piece. So for example, one of my prison weapons looks like a wooden doorstop. It's got a shard of glass jammed in it, and then it's got bed sheets wrapped around it. Those are just some of the materials people were talking to me about.
Yeah. What was it? And like the materials that were available to someone who was incarcerated.
If you see a guy walking around with like a belly shirt on because it's all ripped, it's because they're tearing the string out of their shirts and unwinding their shirt and using it either to wrap up a weapon or to make a kite. And the kites are ways they send messages back and forth from cell to cell.
In the spring of 2014, a switch went off, and you decided to really explore textures and materials for art making on two-dimensional surfaces. What was happening in the spring of 2014, and what prompted that switch to go off?
The spring of 2014. I think someone commissioned me to make a piece. They commissioned me to make a painting. They said, we want a painting. And I was like, well, what do you want? And they were like, whatever you want to do. Just make a painting.
Like a collector commissioned you.
Yeah, a collector. And so I started painting, right? And I remember I took it to school, and I was painting it at school. That way, on my planning, I could look at it. While I'm teaching, I could glance over at it, see how I'm reacting to it. And I started painting on it, and I was like, I don't like this. And so what I did was materials at hand. It's kind of like a fate thing, right? There was paper right there that I'd been, what we talked about earlier, I'd been painting on. So I started tearing them and cutting them up and started just taping them up there. And I had a windowsill. And I was like, oh, cool, it's a window. Okay, that's what I'm doing. I'm going to do a mountain range outside of a window. It's a couple, so I'll put a cup or two of coffee on the windowsill to kind of represent their relationships or whatever. But man, that really opened the door. That was the first time I started like using the paper to build these things. And it wasn't necessarily like a really successful piece, but it was that kind of moment where I was like, okay, like, let's see where we can take this. And I think I had a show at Zeke's in Virginia Beach like the next month. And so I was just going to do paintings and stuff. But right then I made the decision to do all collage. So all my pieces, there was like probably 20 pieces of collage work in that little show.
And for the last 3 years, you're best known now for these collage paintings that are created using hand-painted papers, which you cut and layer to form images such as houses, boats, landscapes, weapons, tools, and food. You talked a little bit about how that process came about in 2014. How has the process changed from 2014 to 2017 in terms of the creation of it? Has it changed?
Yeah, it has. I prepare my materials a lot more now. Like if I know I'm making Elvis's hair, right? I'm gonna want 5 different tones of that dark blue, black.
Mm-hmm.
I'm gonna want different textures in there as well. So I'll paint my papers. I'll prepare them, knowing what I'm gonna use them for. Maybe I'll throw a little curve in there because I'm gonna do that big pompadour. Like I'm gonna throw a little curve into that into those textures, and then that way when I go to start cutting them out, they kind of fit what I'm already going. Earlier, I was leaving it up to chance. Whatever I had around, I would use. Now, I'm preparing them more so I can make them a little bit more sophisticated. I'm also adding an element of hand painting into my stuff. So, like, if I'm doing wood grains, I used to do them with colored pencil. I'll still do them with colored pencil because you can get them, like, photorealistic. But I'll actually go through and hand paint and kick it back to those times where I was faux finishing those columns for a bar. I kind of bring back those skills.
Your collage pieces, have such incredible detail, and someone who casually strolls by at an art show may not notice what is actually going on in your paintings. Just as someone who pulls up your Facebook, your Instagram page may just scroll past it without pausing to examine the work. What goes through your head when you think about that?
Yeah, that's that's probably the biggest challenge I have is saying, "Hey, look, this is what I'm doing." Because it's easy to just kind of walk by and look, "Oh, there's a painting. Cool." But it's not. It's a lot more complicated than that. But what really kind of just what keeps me in the game is the people that do like spend that split second to really get a little bit closer and take a peek at it and say, whoa, that's collaged, then it opens the door for me to kind of have the conversation.
Some of your most popular pieces are a series of prints of stakes on sticks. How did that idea come about?
Well, I think, getting a job, being self-supportive, getting older in general kind of makes you, or makes me anyway, think about like survival in this whole different way. When I was a little kid, I used to think that the older I get, the less things I'll be able to tolerate pain better. I'll be able to not be as scared as much. And then God's cruel joke is the older you get, the more sensitive to pain you are. The more you think about stuff, the more you overanalyze things. It's like the complete opposite of what I thought was going to happen. So the stakes on the sticks was this sounds like kind of artsy and cheesy, but really they came from a place of like thinking about survival. Like if I got fired today, if the world was coming to an end and I had to run to the woods to survive, I can fish. I'm physically fit. I can, go hunt or whatever. So it was kind of like, I want to do a series on like survival. And so I had this kind of like poppy way of playing with survival.
You've been collecting stories from around Norfolk, Virginia for the last 8 months, weird events, historical moments. Your new show is called Neighborhood Watch. Let's talk about some of the things you found, Andy. You found an old Civil War tunnel in someone's backyard?
This show has been really cool because I've been living in Norfolk for 2 years. So I had this idea of like collecting these stories, but at the same time, I was like, I'm going to familiarize myself with this neighborhood and the people within it. And now, because I've been doing this, I go out of my way to say hey to somebody and just strike up a conversation. I've made these really cool relationships, and it feels like home, and so the Civil War tunnel came from a guy. It was an older guy who owned a house, and we got to talking about it. And I told him about my art show and was kind of piquing his interest with some of the stories I was telling him. And he was like, I have a tunnel in my backyard. And he was like, you can't tell anybody about it, so I can't say who it is or where he lives in Norfolk because he doesn't want anyone telling him what he can and can't do with his property. But, for the sake of just storytelling, he's like, you got to come over and look at it. So I went over and we lift up. He's like, you got to lift this rock up. And he's sitting down watching me. And so I lift this big rock up, big flat piece of granite, and there's a piece of plywood. Lift up the plywood, and sure enough, man, there's a brick manhole, probably about the size of a large pizza. And there's just a pile of dirt down there, but you can kind of stick your head in a little bit and see that it kind of goes under towards his house. And I'm like, dude, this is awesome. He's like, yeah. So I had a contractor back here working, and he treated all his guys like crap, and he made one of them walk through it. So he said the guy was like 100 pounds, 5 foot tall, and he was able to walk through it, not crawl, but he just had to hunch over. And he said it took him all the way out to the street, and when he got to the street, he got spooked. And so he didn't want to go any further, but he said he could see about 100 yards down this tunnel, and he could see water. And he also described the tunnel as having brick arches, right? And the sides were brick. So that really got my like Goonies thing running. It's like, oh man, there's this underground tunnel.
Another one of the stories that you came across for your upcoming show, Neighborhood Watch, is a man who screen printed 500,000 Michael Jackson hats for his Dangerous World Tour, which happened back in 1991. The tour did not come through Norfolk at all. So talk about the Michael Jackson screen printed 500,000 hats.
This is why this project for me is so awesome, because this little gem of a story is here right under our feet, and everyone walks right by it every day, and we don't know it's there. So this Tommy Kazmark, at the time, his printing company was called International Print House, and he printed here in Norfolk. He's in Virginia Beach now, and he's done a ton of stuff. When he started rattling off everything he's done, I was like, whoa, whoa. And then he said, yeah, I did Michael Jackson hats. And I was like, whoa, 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 what? Because I was looking to do more like pop culture influenced artwork for the show. And so, yeah, for his Dangerous tour, he printed 500,000 hats for his tour that I think were sold in Europe, or I don't really know where they were sold.
Yeah, the tour is mostly Asia and Europe.
Yeah, and I didn't know what they looked like. I was like, dude, do you have one? Like, can I?
Yeah.
Well, first of all, can I look at it? But then maybe can I have it? He didn't have, but he had a picture that he used. He's got a library of everything he's ever done. So he had a picture of it, and it has Michael Jackson's eyes on it. But the coolest part was it has like a big HBO in yellow logo on the side. So I made a piece about Michael Jackson, these hats that were printed here, and there's no deep meaning behind it. It's a Michael Jackson hat hanging from a nail. And I left off the HBO logo because I could not figure out a way to make it look cool.
Another story that you came across for your Neighborhood Watch exhibition coming up is that Harry Houdini was arrested in Norfolk for getting in a fight.
Yeah, he was arrested after assaulting the theater owner, or the theater manager at the time. Harry had done something that was causing the Actors or Performers Guild or something to dock him some money. And it just so happened that it fell on his show here. So when he went to pick his check up, it was like a substantial, I want to say $400 less than what he was supposed to get, which back then was a lot of money. So he ends up getting in a fight with the manager. The reason I was really drawn to that story is because after kind of through my show, I started like really investigating Houdini. Read a book on him. Read one of his books. I actually listened to one of his books while I was making art. He had this book called The Right Way to Do Wrong, and it tells you about how burglars rob you.
What a great title!
Oh, it's awesome. And so he would typically, when he would go to a city, he'd go to the police department and, entertain the police officers by breaking out of their handcuffs, by breaking out of their cells. So I just thought it was hilarious that he comes to Norfolk and he gets arrested and thrown in jail. It's like, dude, you can't throw Harry Houdini in jail.
One of the pieces in your show is about Marilyn Monroe coming through Norfolk and losing like a makeup container.
Well, what the story goes is it's like early 80s. I think it's 1983. This 15-year-old kid, his parents were having a party, and he's out in the backyard playing with the dog, and he sees something shiny in the mud, so he goes and he picks it up, and he's like, whoa, what is this? Takes it inside, washes it off, and it was like a 2.5-inch square makeup compact, and engraved on it was to Marilyn Monroe, the best friend a diamond could ever have. So the story is they kept it under wraps. They cleaned it off. They got a private appraiser to come in to check its authenticity. They sold it to a private collector, actually. So, and I think the kid's parents used that money for his college education. So my goal was to set out to find out if Marilyn Monroe ever came to Norfolk and if she was ever put in a position where she could have lost it near the water and nature brings it up on shore. I never found out the answers to those questions.
One of the titles of your pieces is Yellow Fever, and there's a mass grave from like way back in 1855, something like that.
Yeah, there's this small park at the intersection of Princess Anne Road and Hampton Boulevard, and it's nice and pretty, but a lot of people don't know that it's a mass grave, right? In 1855, the summertime of 1855, the yellow fever killed 1/3 of Norfolk's population.
Wow.
And that was one of the burial sites.
And one of the stories for your show has to do with Elvis, and it's called A Hard-Working Man's Hair.
Yeah, Elvis played in Norfolk a lot. And so that's kind of where I pulled the title from. He was always here. There are really cool stories connected with Elvis in here. People were always grabbing, he would throw out scarves to the crowd. And you can go to the Slover Library and find articles about when Elvis came through Norfolk. People were always like ripping buttons and scarves off of them and trying to sell them and they successfully sold them for lots of money.
So I have a couple more things, and you can tell me and jump into if you want. Andy, on your Instagram page, you seem to really enjoy fishing. Can you talk a little bit about what role fishing plays in your life and what it provides you?
My dad was a big fisherman, and his dad was a big fisherman, and they call my dad Flounder Freddy. Fast Freddy, Flounder Freddy. I've been fishing with him my whole life, and I got a kayak from a friend, and I've had this kayak, and I usually go fishing a lot. My life has become so busy this year that I have neglected that, and I need to get back to it, because that's where when I hit a bump in the road, as far as like creatively, I mean, getting outside of this creative space is the best recipe for success. Going fishing, going surfing, going to get a workout in, going to a movie. Those are the things that'll bring the better ideas, is getting out of this space. I typically fish during the fall for speckled trout. That's my favorite thing to do.
You've been working out and lifting weights for several years. Why did you start going to the gym, and what's been your secret to being so disciplined to maintain it over the long haul?
Oh, man. Oh, God. How could you tell I worked out? My muscles?
Yeah. Your muscles.
Oh, man. Dude, it keeps my head on right. I mean, like, it's one of those things. It's like, I can't work out at home because it doesn't have the impact, you know? When I'm working out, when I'm following all that maintenance stuff, I handle life so much better. I'm so much more pleasant to be around. I'm a better fit in this world when I'm taking care of myself.
Did you stick with it immediately, or was there like a certain time? Because the trick to working out, in my limited experience with it years ago, was I got to a point where I felt really bad about not showing up the next day. Mm-hmm. And it was like the pressure that I put on myself. So what was your experience to sort of making it stick?
I mean, it kind of makes me think of like someone told me that, dude, if you really want to do something, you'll make the time to do it. And then I've also heard that you have more time than you think. And I think both of those can be true. But I look at, and even working out is like, I don't even like the word. I just like to move around, man. I like to get out and be physical while my body is in its prime. And I won't go to the gym and be like, I've got to do, hammer
legs.
Curls. Yeah, legs. I got to do abs. Like, I'll get in there and play around. Sometimes I go in there and do a quick little 20-minute workout. Sometimes I'll sign up for a class and really be pushed to the, to where I would never take myself, that someone else is leading me down. I'll go take a yoga class. I love riding my bike to the studio, just staying active. I try not to think of it as like, I'm going to work out. It's like, I'm going to move my body, and I think Colonel Sanders says you'll rust out before you wear out.
The chicken guy?
The chicken guy.
Andy Harris, thanks so much for coming on the show.
Hey, thanks for having me, man.
This is Andrew Paul Cronin, and you've been listening to the Q&A with A.P.C. To hear archived episodes, visit QAAPC.com. For exclusive content, including upcoming shows, behind-the-scenes pictures, and more, follow the show on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter at QAAPC. The executive producer of the Q&A with A.P.C. is Ben Riley. The music was arranged by Soup.